So there was a small divide among the Titanfall community previously, which is about an experimental mode Respawn added called High TTK or Time to Kill mode. This mode had some minor tweaks to the multiplayer that drastically changed the feeling of the game. The major change was with certain weapons, notably hit scan weapons, and that they required 1 or 2 extra shots to kill an enemy pilot. To account for these changes, the pilot abilities Grapple, Stim, and Phase Shift were altered. Grapple had a small cooldown so you couldn't spam it constantly, Stim had its speed reduced, and Phase Shift had only one charge but more active time. Sadly, the mode has been removed since the War Games DLC dropped, but it was astounding while it lasted. Many players enjoy this mode as well, and want these changes to be implemented into the base game. Respawn has made it clear that they want to continue to improve the game as much as possible, as well as secure a future for its franchise. And I know this is all my opinion and speculation, but I believe a High TTK Titanfall 2 is the best way to accomplish these goals. Think about first-person shooters like Halo, Battlefield, and Destiny. What do these games have in common? Well, guns of course no toy, but what's so special about those guns? Besides obvious power weapons, the average weapon has a relatively high time to kill, especially in a realistic scenario where you'd be fighting someone for longer than the optimum time to kill. And this causes an environment where you can be more creative in your gunfights, whether it be to get a kill or to avoid being killed. It means you have more time to react to your situations instead of being instantly gunned down as soon as you turn a corner, with no means to defend yourself or to even comprehend there was danger. It also means you don't get instantly gunned down by a G2 from across the map. It creates a situation where you feel more in control of what's going on, and your enjoyment is increased when there's less scenarios that feel unfair. When you are more in control of the game and scenarios face, you are able to push the game and your skills to the limit. You're able to zip around the map with clever techniques like slide hopping and air strafing around at 1,000 miles per hour, with debatably the most liberating and best movement in any FPS right now. And it sucks when a frantic joyride ends when someone panic fires you without a second thought. In the High TTK mode, keeping your movement was king. If you were good with your jukes, it gave you that extra edge to stay alive and outplay people. It also meant you couldn't just spray and pray to get points. You actually needed to be good with your aim. This obviously means there is a bigger skill gap, which was the main controversy about the mode. But this led to people using all kinds of guns, especially the projectile ones, and that's because the risk and reward in using projectile weapons felt right. They felt like how they should have always been. And these were the weapons that didn't seem to have their time to kill raised, which made them viable enough to be used seriously and not just solely meme joke guns. For example, what was the point in using the SMR if it killed just as quickly as an R2, but your shots didn't hit your enemy instantly or at all? It's also a reason snipers are barely used. What's the point of limiting yourself to a slow shooting gun that hinges your awareness when you could just use G2 much more effectively at the same range? God damn it. A selling point in any shooter game is how many toys you have to turn your enemies into a red mist. But what's the point of having all those toys if all of them are the same or most don't matter or even work? For example, Destiny's gun variety for a while was like going back to your house at the end of trick-or-treating, only to find the bag had a surprising amount of rocks. But in Titanfall 2, Respawn gave us an actual candy bag, filled with really good candies and chocolates. Sure, there were things like licorice and those weird sour candies representing projectile weapons, but they had a niche and certain people really liked them. They're not bad, but most of the time they're not the first pick of the bag. But what if they could be? What if they could be on the same level as first pick? In High TTK mode, every weapon was viable, and it gave Titanfall 2 a leg up on most first-person shooters by not only having variety, but by having viable variety. You didn't feel like you were restricting yourself at all in choosing a niche weapon. For example, the SMR is one of my favorite guns in concept. I think it's such a fun and cool design. However, I do feel like I limit myself when using it since its accuracy is poor due to the rocket's slow travel time. But in High TTK mode, I found it surprisingly useful, and I even saw other pilots running around with it and other projectile weapons. I know a counter-argument to this could be, why do the hit-scan weapons have to be weaker? Why can't the projectile weapons just be buffed? And the answer is very simple, because buffing them in any way would make them overpowered. There are only two ways I see to buffing them, making them do more damage or have less bullet travel. The first option makes them overpowered, as they have the same or quicker time to kill compared to the hit-scan guns. Imagine a 2-shot L-Star or a Mastiff being a 1-shot at rifle range. The other option, to make the projectiles travel faster, would practically make them hit-scan weapons. The challenge of leading your targets would be gone, and make them too powerful, and nerfing their damage to compensate this would make them lose their interesting qualities. However, their power in a high TTK environment is kept in check due to the skill required to lead and aim so the projectiles could hit. Respawn made a good variety of weapons that all feel unique, and have their own playstyles, advantages, and disadvantages. And having projectile-based guns be more viable is objectively good for the players, since out of the 26 non-anti-Titan pilot weapons, 10 of them are projectile-based. And this makes them more appealing to use and experiment with, which extends their playtime. And when you play the game for longer, Respawn notices, and so does Papa EA, which leads to the next segment of the video. So again, think of another thing Halo, Battlefield, and Destiny have in common. The answer this time is a devoted online player base, and I believe a reason for this is the high time to kill in these games. This can keep players engaged for a longer time because the skill gap equals challenge, and challenge is interesting. And the skill gap can be large enough for experienced players to outperform newer players. While at first new players may be overwhelmed by the skill disparity from veterans, it also has them thinking, I want to be that good too. A game with a skill gap will want you to be able to aim better, move better, think better, and play better. And that's because we want to win. We have a drive to improve ourselves in any activity, so we're able to beat our competitors. We want to show off our skills to others so that one day people will see us and think, I want to be that good too. However, to get to that point, you need to practice. And boy, do you need to practice. And even when you get to a point where you feel like you learned all the game's mechanics, you still want to learn how to take these newfound strategies and skills even further. And while you play, you discover unique, intricate nuances in the game. You start trying out new weapons, tacticals, abilities, titans, techniques, and more to maximize your skill or find a playstyle that fits you best. Unless you're a G2 amped wall casual, so you just skip all that. But by experimenting and trying to become a better player, you've extended your playtime drastically, and you become more attached to the game and are more positive to it. And during that time, maybe you've thought to yourself, hey, those prime times look pretty cool, I think I'll get one of those. Or, those new camos look nice, I think I'll buy them. And not only that, if you like the game, you are more willing to recommend or even buy it for a friend. And the longer they play, then the longer their chances of also buying some sweet DLC like the North Star Prime increases, or Mr. Diaper Boy over here. This can equate to more money to Respawn, and in turn EA, who ultimately decides the route the Titanfall series takes. And I know there are games that sell their DLC and microtransactions well enough with low skill gaps, but here's the thing. Think of the loot box style of microtransactions these games have, which people don't buy because they are enjoying the game, but because the game forces them to. Key elements of the game are locked away from the player behind a paywall. They aren't buying them for their added content, they're buying them because it's the only way to access content they want to experience, like a new gun. Many games have bad DLC practices that hurt a game's experience and image more than help it, and can lead to a bitter fanbase that campaign against the franchise. But Titanfall 2 has the exact opposite model. Microtransactions are purely cosmetic items where you get exactly what you want and content isn't withheld from you. People aren't upset at Titanfall 2's microtransactions because there's no reason to be, and that lets them be more willing to spend a little more money on the game. Another way Titanfall 2 can benefit by having a higher skill gap is by having a more committed competitive scene. Video game tournaments are nothing new, but nowadays it seems like any skill-based game is trying to ride the gravy train, and there's a good reason for it. It brings attention to the game, and it brings in a lot of money. However, some games aren't as fun to watch since they don't require a lot more skill than a normal player has. We watch pros in a tournament because we want to be impressed. We want to see people do crazy stunts that we can't do. It makes us invested to get that good, but if we see a high-end tournament with pros that don't seem to be much better than us, does that really make us want to get better or even be more excited to play the game? Titanfall 2 isn't like this. Just on its movement system alone is it entertaining to watch, but it's also difficult to master. It's why we like to see people try to break the record speeds in the gauntlet. And if the game has a higher skill gap in its gunfights, it can be even more exciting to watch in a tournament. And this game has huge potential in that setting. Imagine seeing pro teams duke it out. That'd be insane to watch. And don't even get me started on the Titans, since that speaks for itself. Sadly though, a lot of people see the futuristic Call of Duties and Titanfall as being the same game technically, and that may deter them from it. But perhaps seeing a Titanfall 2 tournament may get people to see the differences and get them interested to buy the game. One last thing I want to mention an argument for a higher time to kill, and in turn a higher skill gap in Titanfall 2 is that when other games had theirs lowered, it didn't work out. Lowering the skill gap in games like in Halo 4 or Battlefield Hardline led to much backlash and led to an arguably less interesting or worse experience compared to the previous titles. So, maybe doing the opposite and raising the skill gap can lead to a more interesting and better experience instead? Respawn has a very dedicated fan base, and they are well known to be very responsive to taking feedback and suggestions. So, if somehow Respawn saw this, I hope they at least take one thing from the video. Nerf the fucking G2.